Hi, welcome to Story Time. It's just an opportunity for a midweek check-in. How are you doing? How's life in your neck of the woods? I want to talk about imperfections and the practice of embracing our imperfections. And in fact, one of my favorite authors and my favorite books is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. But the story I want to share with you today, I hope will be an encouraging one that is both authentic in my journey to share with you, but also inspiring for you perhaps to embrace even more of your authenticity. See, this book, The Gifts of Imperfections, was truly life-changing for me. And it's been a slow progress. It didn't just happen overnight. Just like this imperfection, right? This curly, frizzy hair on a rainy spring day, or the amount of white hair versus dark hair remaining from my earlier years. The gifts of imperfection are about embracing our authenticity, about showing up just as we are. Now, much of my life has been dictated by the doings, the tasks that need to be done, the achievements to be accomplished and pursued and endured sometimes. But the gift of imperfection from Brené Brown really is, just as she says in the subtitle, it's an invitation to let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. In fact, she defines that this wholehearted living, is what she calls it, is different and yet not different from what I teach as inspired living, rooted in the practices of yoga, also known as yoga living, meaning yoga beyond the mat, yoga beyond the asana, the pranayama, breathing, and the meditation. She says that wholehearted living is not a one-time choice, it's a process. But how, she says, do we embrace this imperfection? How do we take advantage? How do we embrace imperfection? How do we cultivate what we need and let go of the things that are holding us back? She says the answers to these questions are courage, compassion, and connection. Courage, compassion, and connection are the gifts of embracing our own imperfection. I am living proof of that. Now, embracing my imperfection was a bit forced upon me, meaning that after a traumatic bicycle accident, I couldn't do the things that had defined me by way of my human doings before the accident. I couldn't think, I couldn't work, I couldn't carry my children, I couldn't organize and orchestrate my life. I was truly incapacitated from physical pain, but more importantly, from brain damage, right? But in that transition, I was forced to redesign how I was living my life. And what I learned in the process is that I was really good at doing, but I wasn't good at all at just being still, being alone, being myself. And so in the course of that year of recovery, a lot of bed rest, a lot of downtime, a lot of isolation, because my senses were overstimulated by even the slightest thing. I couldn't listen to music. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't even enjoy, let alone survive the sound of my own children's laughter. So I went deep in, and in going deep in, what I learned is that it wasn't safe there. I had a lot of negative self-talk lingering from my younger days. And in fact, my mature days had been primarily looking for ways to numb, ignore, and avoid those deeper truths, those deeper whisperings built around fears and lack and not enoughness. But what I learned in that process is that I can do hard things and I can learn new things to do those hard things, those things that maybe I once could do, but no longer can. And as a result of that acceptance, which again didn't happen overnight, it was a process, I learned to rely on my husband for support. And how grateful I am that I was able to do that. Not just that he was there to support me, but that he encouraged me, invited me over and over and over again to accept his help and to not do. See, that was probably the most important lesson for me, was to stop doing all of the things, which included the judgment and the self-criticism and the self-loathing that came on the tail of everything I couldn't do. I felt like a failure. By embracing this acceptance of just being, this invitation to just be myself, to just be broken, to just be weak, to just be, I was able to let go of a lot of the pushing to do. And that was huge for me, because it was really this process that Brene calls becoming, or this process of embracing my own imperfection. Now, the truth of the matter is, the gifts of imperfection, the courage, the compassion, and the connection are the gifts, but they are also the tools, meaning they're the skills we need to practice in action and inaction in order to then reap them as gifts. So what does courage require? What does connection require? What does compassion require as a skill? Maybe different for each of us. For me, compassion first showed up as just allowing myself to be broken, to admit what I could and couldn't do. This compassion for myself eventually grew to compassion for others, both in what I knew they could and couldn't do, and creating kind of an umbrella of grace when I didn't know for a fact that they couldn't do it. It was easier to extrapolate and create that grace area that maybe, just maybe, they were doing their best, in which case I had much less aggression and anger and frustration for their inability to do what I thought that they should do. And that again referred also back to my own self-compassion. Now, courage to do hard things was not something that was absent to me. I had flexed that muscle throughout my life, right? Academically, intellectually, even emotionally. Although most of my emotional courage had to do with shoving down emotions or compartmentalizing and creating boundaries that separated my work life from my personal life, my family life from my friend life. And creating those boundaries did give me a sense of ease, but they were coping strategies until I was able to take down those walls brick by brick, or in my case, by running into a wall, really, in order to recognize that the wall was a defense mechanism. It was a protective armor that shielded me not only from the connection, but from the authentic self and the ability to be with others fully. In other words, the courage and the connection for me went hand in hand. The courage to show up broken, the courage to be seen as incomplete, as authentic. I mean, it was when I embraced allowing my hair to turn white with no more coloring. And I sometimes honestly struggle with it today. I'll be encouraged to, hey, why not play with color, especially if it's a fun color like pink or a purple or a teal. And I considered it, but there's a part of me that is still young in this practice of authenticity, meaning not wearing the makeup that I was taught to wear as a professional, not doing the hair as far as coloring and styling and always putting an effort into that presentation. I wanted instead to put that effort into the showing up, the allowing myself to be authentic. Now, she goes into this book, she describes, let's see if I can find it. I lost my page. Practicing courage, compassion, and connection in our daily lives is how we cultivate worthiness. And if I could put one label on what ailed me, what was my root suffering my entire life, was this fear of unworthiness, this internal belief that I was not worthy, that I was not good enough or ready enough or smart enough or pretty enough or whatever enough. That unworthiness was the root of much of my own suffering, which now, having been studying the practices of yoga and the teachings of the Buddha for many years, I recognize that that is my own mindset, my own perception was causing my suffering. So as she says, practicing courage, compassion, and connection, they are both the gifts of our embracing of imperfection, but also the tools used to cultivate our authenticity, our willingness to be imperfect, to be just as we are. The key word, she says, is practice. In fact, Brené Brown quotes Mary Daly, a theologian, who wrote, "Courage is like a habit, a virtue. You get it by courageous acts. It's like you learn to swim by swimming. You learn courage by couraging." And Brené says the same is true for compassion and connection. We invite compassion into our lives when we act compassionately toward ourselves and others. And we feel connected in our lives when we reach out and connect. So whether or not you are ready to embark on a book study with the gift of imperfections, right? I even offer a guided program to integrate the teachings of yoga and inspired living with Brené Brown's works. But we're all on a path to live in greater ease. Some even define it that we, by our nature, are driven to cultivate happiness and joy. And yet happiness and joy are really that intersection of courage and compassion and connection, the gifts and the tools of embracing our own imperfection. So I've shared with you over the past couple of weeks some of the ways in which I'm still learning to be my imperfect self, still in process. And I hope to continue to be in process for all of my days. But I also hope to cultivate more authenticity, more compassion, more courage, and more opportunities for connection. And the way that I do that is I practice compassion. I practice courage. And I invite by practicing connection. That's what I do. That to me is my life's work. It's my dharma. And the way in which I do that practice is by showing up here and inviting you to meet me when you're ready. Whether we move together, whether we talk together, whether we share our struggles or we celebrate our successes, when we can show up just as we are and facilitate that connection, not only do we embrace our own beauty and our own inner wisdom, we actually get to realize and recognize just how amazing connection is, how truly it is opening us to happiness and joy. And that's why I call it inspired living. The union of you and me, the union of what has come and what is yet to be, the union of prana and body and mind, yoga living. Some of the things that I've done that are courageous. This is so scary to me. Still showing up on camera, seeing my own self in this rawness, this nakedness, this disheveledness sometimes, and embracing that this is me being authentic. This is me showing you who I am at my core. And this is me allowing you to like or not like, to listen or not listen, to join me or to go your own way. And that, honestly, is probably one of the hardest things any of us could ever do, is to love one another without attachment, to allow one another to be our authentic selves, even if we don't like it, even if it doesn't meet my expectations, my desires. In other words, we are designed to be in connection, and we are also designed to be our own unique self, and finding that ebb and flow. To me, that's the joy of living mindfully every day, to let go a little bit of my doingness in order to embrace not only my imperfections, but my being, just being as I am. Because in being, I create that pause, that space that allows me to see that this too is a process. The process of learning to be is the same process as becoming, as blooming, as being our best authentic selves. What are you perhaps resisting about your own imperfection? What is it about connection and courage and compassion that keep you from perhaps finding that place of ease? And how can you practice? Doesn't have to be perfect, right? Doesn't have to be done. Just a little more practice, a little more effort, a little more frequent, a little more willing. And remember, it's enough to just want to. That too might be the first step of your practice. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know how compassion, how courage, how connection is a celebration of the practice of showing up and the gift of showing up for life. Be well. May you breathe deeply and move freely, labor lovingly, and live vibrantly. Namaste.